Oh, there.
No, it's not.
It takes a minute. It's very slow.
I wonder what Katie is. It's been. What time?
Wow, it's 7:54.
Oh, I don't know.
Mhm.
How long am I supposed to be? What for the mom? Telling me you wrote it down. I can't find it outside. I'm just doing it. I told him, I was like.
There.
I love the name. I just, you have a narrative about the district, so I'll include.
There's people in here.
Yeah. Well.
There's, you know, there's. What I had to do for that, which is not bad. I have to do more. Sorted. Assessments, even if they were, some kids. So it just, it doesn't calculate. It's not calculating, it's not clean. And then I don't know if that discipline data is accurate, if you like judge, you would be able to like. This is since August. Yeah. I'm not worried about it. Didn't one person, I thought maybe one person came.
Recording in progress.
Good morning. Okay, we got it. This thing may or may not work.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it does. Okay, good news.
Awesome.
You're all set.
I'm excited for ribbon cutting or. How are you? I understand out.
Look at you two. Y'all have already seen this presentation. What are you doing here? Oh, that's so nice. Thank you, friends.
This good stuff. Morning.
Yeah, we are.
So I haven't gotten to that point yet, but like the petition.
Good, how are you?
Secretary's sent some time.
I got it, yeah. I'm waiting on one more and then I'll let you know.
Are you? Are you married yet?
Not yet. We're
It's coming.
allegedly.
All right, everybody, we're gonna get started. We have a lot of people here and Dr. Katie Lamberson has a lot to say, and educate us on, so we're gonna go ahead and do introductions. Name, why you're here, your organization or affiliation to prevention work. And if you have anything that you have done prevention work or your organization is doing something that you would like to promote right now, we're gonna go ahead and do that. So I'm Rachel Caden. I'm the program director of ZITS, the Forsyth County Drug Awareness Council. The only thing I wanted to say is in front of you is a flyer for the Walk for Recovery. This is one of our like big events that we put on in the year that we really ask for all of your participation, help and attendance. So this event is to help eliminate stigma in the community. It is to support those that are in recovery, and it is to provide resources and Narcan and all the organizations at the Cumming City Center. It's meant to be a fun family event just for everybody in the community. So there'll be like fake paint bubbles, coffee, yard games, all that stuff. But last year we had a pretty good turnout. We had about 300 people and the city center wasn't even open. But our biggest issue, as y'all probably know, is getting people to attend events like this if it's not their problem, right? So what I'm asking for everybody is please spread the word. Please tell everybody that you know. Please, show this flyer to people and come to that event. All right, that's my soapbox. I'm gonna pass it off.
I'm Caroline. I'm the project coordinator at the council. This flyer is awesome. Please share it everywhere you can. We have it on Facebook and on Instagram. On Facebook, there's a button at the bottom. You can just hit share and it shares it to wherever you want it to go. So that makes it pretty easy. If you want the copies printed out, please let me know. I can make that happen. But yeah, we're trying to reach as many people as possible. It's gonna be awesome. So let me know.
My name is Emily Ennis. I am a substance use counselor at the Insight program, and I am currently at Northside.
My name is Joshua Kingston. I'm in recovery and I care about the county.
Michael Town, I'm the director of the Full Circle program, here to help you.
My name is Cynthia Cook. I'm the NAG coordinator at Full Circle, and I guess to touch on prevention work that we've been doing. So we just did, I know all of you were at the drug summit, which is awesome at Full Circle. I'm really glad we got to do that again this year. And then we've been continuing to do toss and classes in middle schools and high schools. So I'm actually going to Little Mill later this afternoon to speak to 6th and 7th graders, so it's been awesome.
My name is Gabby Brighton. I am also a substance counselor with the Insight program, and I have been in the schools full time for the past 3 years, mainly at ACE, which is Gateway Academy and Forsyth Academy. But to touch on some prevention stuff, we've also been volunteering at some of the schools like Denmark and Lambert and doing weekly support groups there, and also going into the middle schools and schools and doing prevention classes.
I think I'm a retired middle school teacher, but here because of the other already died because of drugs.
Sarah Hydraria, Director of Forsyth County Community Connection, which is the Georgia Family Connection Partnership for Forsyth County. We're just saying a couple of things that's going on. Saturday, March 23rd, we have a resource and volunteer fairs from 11 to 1. Right now, we've got 28 different partner agencies signed up. So it's a great time to come and learn about resources in your community, but also about volunteer opportunities. We're also gonna have 2 different service projects going on that day. It's gonna be at the LDS Church on the Lanaga Highway, it's right from the local church. Also, April 8th, we're gonna been working on with the group, a drop-in center for resources for homeless youth. And so that's gonna open on April 8th. It's gonna more as it opens and grows and we see the needs of that vulnerable population.
Good morning, Lindsay Simpson, Student Support Services.
Kristen Keith, I'm the Assistant Director for Student Support. I'm just loving learning about all the programs and things that are happening in our schools and hoping to just continue to support that and get the word out on events like this to our community, our school districts.
I'm Karen Cole, I'm wellness coach and community school coordinator at Forsyth Central, and I haven't been here for a few months, so I missed you guys. So, nice to see you.
I'm Angela Hurd, I'm an assistant principal for North Forsyth High School. I started working in this arena with wellness at Forsyth Central, and now I'm at North Forsyth. So just want to continue to, know what's going on in our county, so I can use the resources and spread the word as far as resources for our families, for kids who are struggling. And go Raiders. Yeah.
I'm Adam Miller, formerly Director of Outreach at No Longer Bound, currently Business Development for Red Top Wellness Center, North Georgia Recovery Center, Tennessee Wellness Center.
I've been Rachel for a little while, and I'm glad to tell you about this. I applied for some master's programs and wanted to be a professional counselor, so I'm in that phase of my life. I've worked for nonprofits in the past, one in Houston, and then worked mostly just my own recovery and with others. Welcome.
My name is Claire Holbrook. I'm a forever resident of Forsyth County. And I'm the actually new opioid data analyst for Public Health District 2. So Forsyth County is one of my counties.
I'm also a longtime Forsyth County resident and business owner and mother of. My oldest son is actually set up to graduate from Forsyth County Drug Court in a few months, so pray for him that we'll make it there. And speaking of drug court, because I think the last meeting was off-site, I know Cindy and Susan were there, but I guess Forsyth County Drug Court celebrated their 20th anniversary, and it was really a great event, and the only feel-good government moment I've ever had in my life, just to hear Judge Bagley talk about how many babies have been born to drug court graduates, and just what that program actually saves money and keeps people out of jail. And anyway, that's just another great thing going on. And
Susan Tanner, I'm the mom of 2 grown step-kids with problems, and I do a lot of mentoring through mental need, middle schoolers, and I just started in grade schools. And then you are the moms that need somebody to
Cindy Mills, Forsyth County Board of Commissioners through December 31st. Then I'll just be somebody that's an advocate for the drug council, just somebody.
Lisa Lingelbrecht, I'm actually one of Dr. Lingerson's students at University of North Georgia, their addictions counseling program. And then I'm also doing my internship at a clinical mental health community clinic.
I'm Cassie. I'm also a student of Dr. Lingerson, on the addiction track at the University of North Georgia, and also a community clinic, as an intern counselor.
And we fit you guys.
I'm Carol Simpson, I'm the Assistant Director of the Accountability Services.
I'm Emily Dent. I work at Recovery Center, it's a residential facility in Monroe, Georgia. I'll also do some volunteer work at
Okay. Zoom members, we want to get started on this presentation from Katie. So I'm so sorry I wasn't going to have you guys yourself, but is there anything that you would like to promote or say that we need to know? You have 5 seconds.
Nope.
Okay. So again, the point oh, Tom walked in late. We're not going to forget him. Tom, can you introduce yourself?
I was trying to see.
And
I'm Tom Cleveland. I'm school board member on the drug council.
okay.
I
So
was excited to see a full parking lot. That was good.
So the point of all these introductions is after the meeting, please collaborate with each other, talk to each other, see if you can help each other out, volunteer for services like this type of organization always needs volunteers for some sort of event or some sort of issue. So talk to each other after. That being said, I would like to introduce Dr. Katie Lambertson. We've seen her in meetings. She is wonderful and she is going to give us education on what drugs do to the brain, which is just so interesting to me. So I'm gonna stop talking. I'm gonna turn it over to you.
All right. So I'm Katie Lamberson. I'm the Assistant Dean of the College of Health Sciences and Professions at University of North Georgia. And I also coordinate the addiction counseling program on the Cumming campus for University of North Georgia. It's the only accredited addiction counseling program in the state. And I've been teaching all the courses in that program for, let's see, it started in 2018, I think, so since that time. So bear with me because what I'm gonna teach you in 15 minutes is something that I usually spend 15 weeks teaching. There's a lot to cover and I want it to be things that matter to you. So if there's things that you kind of feel like, care about that, let's talk about something else, please let me know. Because I can pivot if need be. So Rachel asked me to talk a little bit about kind of the impact of drugs on the brain. So I do have some kind of basic terms that we're going to talk about, and then we'll talk a little bit about how the body processes drugs, and then also what drugs do to the brain. And then we can talk specifically about different drugs too. I'm going to start with kind of the general pieces, and then we can talk about like alcohol versus opiates and that sort of thing. All right. And also because I'm an educator, I'm not going to lecture at you for 50 minutes, so expect participation. Okay. All right, so here are some basic pieces of information that are essential for us to know because they help us understand what drugs are doing in the body. So the first one is the effective dose. Does anybody know what the effective dose of the drug is? I know.
What's prescribed or what will make you like to take every 4 hours or that to have an effect on you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the amount of the drug that's needed for a majority of the population to feel the effect of that drug. So on the flip side, we have the lethal dose. What's the lethal dose?
It kills you.
Yeah, how much that it's going to take a majority of the population to overdose on that specific drug. So the ratio of those two things is what we call the therapeutic index. So the larger the therapeutic index, the safer the drug. So drugs that have a really small therapeutic index essentially means there's a fine line between what is actually going to make you feel what you're supposed to feel from the drug and what's going to kill you. So barbiturates have a notoriously small therapeutic index. That's why we don't use them very often anymore. They're sedatives. We don't use them as much as we use benzodiazepines because benzos are safer because they have a larger therapeutic index. So a lot of times, like when you see in the media, a lot of celebrities have overdosed on barbiturates or deaths have been related to barbiturates. This is why, because the amount that's going to actually make them feel the sedative effect that they want versus the amount that's going to kill them is really, really fine. Questions about that? All right, so half-life. Does anyone know what the half-life is?
How long it stays in your system?
Yeah, so it's the amount of time it takes for half the drug to exit your system, and we would say that takes about 6 half-lives for you to be considered drug-free. So drugs that have a larger half-life means that they're going to stay in your system longer. Drugs that have a smaller half-life, they're going to exit your system quicker. So if you've got a half-life of 10 minutes, then that means 50% of the drug is gone in 10 minutes. If you've got a half-life of an hour, 50% of the drug is gone in an hour.
Question. I've heard that marijuana can stay in your system for 30 days. Is that true?
It has a large half-life. Yeah, so, and it's still detectable in your system. The half-life isn't 30 days, but 6 half-lives is 30 days. So they would still be able to detect it. And you have to think like, so it goes to 50%, then 25%, then 12.5%. So you still have that kind of small amount before you get to what they consider to be drug-free.
Is there any correlation between the THC level that's in it?
Yeah, so the thing with marijuana is the 2 active ingredients are THC and CBD, and they have an inverse relationship. So if you've got a strand of marijuana that has high THC, it's going to have low CBD. So those are gonna have, they're gonna stay in case and statements for longer, half-life is longer, THC than this. All right, withdrawal. We should all be familiar with withdrawal. How do we know what we're gonna see with someone when they're withdrawing from a certain drug?
What they're withdrawing from, like, things that, their own basement health,
Yes, so it absolutely depends on the type of drug, and so if you've got somebody who's withdrawing from a depressant versus an amphetamine, what would the difference be?
The opposite. So the depressant, you're gonna feel more anxious or.
Yes, so withdrawal effects are always the opposite of the intended effect of the drug. So if you're taking a drug that's meant to sedate you or to help you sleep, a withdrawal effect would be insomnia. You're gonna have more trouble sleeping. Always gonna be a rebound effect. And I'll talk about why that is. Potentiate, so we have different classifications of drugs. Potentiate that basically means that if you have built a tolerance within a certain category of drugs, then you take another drug in that same category at the same time, it's gonna have an exponential effect. So if you take, so alcohol and benzos, for example, are both considered depressants. So if you take alcohol and a benzo at the same time, it's not like adding alcohol plus benzo. It's actually like alcohol times benzo. So it's going to exacerbate the effects because they're within the same category. So that's why it's really dangerous to take certain drugs together, because it's going to overinflate the effect that you would expect to feel. So if you're somebody who is used to drinking a certain amount and you get prescribed Xanax or something, and you take it one day and you drink the same amount that you normally drink and you feel way stronger than you're used to feeling, and you're like, why is it that I drank this much in the past? It's because of the fact that you feel that. What's tolerance?
Well, how much you can continue to take because how much you've taken in the past.
Yeah, so it's basically needing to take more of the same thing in order to feel the way you used to feel when you took less. And then cross tolerance happens within the same categories as well. So if you build a tolerance to alcohol and then you're prescribed Xanax, you're likely gonna need a higher dose of Xanax because you've already built a tolerance to alcohol and they're in the same category. So you can have tolerance to drugs that you've never taken before if they're in the same category as drugs that you've had taken before. Questions, Dr.
question about cross tolerance. Is there a lot of data on, even after you've been sober for a long time or the drugs have been out of your system, where anesthesiologists, things like that, they have concern for like their ability to have drug, I mean, does it take a really long time? Like, can it take years for your body to get over that cross tolerance where even though you haven't had the drugs or alcohol in your system?
It can, it depends on a variety of factors. So some of it's related to the drugs. So psychedelics, for example, tolerance builds so quickly and then goes away really quickly too. So the longer it takes to build tolerance, the longer it takes for it to go away. So it depends on the type of drug, it depends on how long you're using and how your intensity of use increased over time. So if you went from like 0 to 60, that would look different than if you built over like 15 years. You probably would take you more like 15 years to get rid of that tolerance as well. We're gonna talk about.
Which this has nothing to do with that, but I found it fascinating. One time we went over to meet with Dr. Norton. Well, I don't know who he is, but he spoke at one of our drug summits, and he's a person in recovery that found mercy through the drug court. And in fact, drug court, Penny was who brought him here to be our speaker, and he was telling us, giving us a little education class over there, but that he had been clean for a long, long time, but he said, you know, when you hit your 50s, your craving comes back like on steroids. I mean, like it comes back wide open, and you can be clean all these years. And I don't know what the age factor, y'all that are in this might know much more than I do, but I thought that, you know, it might get easier, you know, like the longer Not that you can all ever let your guard down, but I thought, but he said, no, the brain didn't work that way, that when, I don't know if it's, hitting a certain something in life with your brain or what, but he said it is factual, that it does happen, and it comes back just like a roaring lion, making you want it again.
So whether some of that might be because, so we talk about from a brain development standpoint, probably about 75% of people who are diagnosed with an addiction or substance use disorder started using before the age of 25. And the reason for that is because your brain's not fully developed. So what happens is the brain learns to function with the drug. And so when the drug's not present, it doesn't know how to do what it's supposed to do on its own. I'm gonna talk about that. But we also see then when you get a certain age, a little bit of a decline in brain functioning back to what it used to be. And so it might be remembering what was back then and going back to meeting what it did at that time. All right, so these are the kind of major classifications of drugs. So there's various drugs within each one, but like I talked about with tolerance, we've got alcohol and benzos or both depressants. That's where cross-tolerance should come in, that's where potentiation would come in. Stimulants, this is like cocaine, amphetamines, methamphetamine. Cannabis is marijuana, opioids are your heroin, morphine, narcotic pills, hallucinogens, psychedelics, which there's actually a lot of debate about the actual addiction potential of those. I won't get into that some time. Synthetics are the man-made, so there's synthetic versions of most of these classifications. And then so when we're talking about pharmacokinetics, we're talking about what the body does with the drug when you put it into your system. And so the acronym is MADME, and I'm not going to go through each one of these, but essentially it's kind of how the drug moves through your body and how long it takes to do that, which is related to the half-life. And so the first thing that has to happen is it has to be absorbed. So we can tell how long it's going to take for a drug to take effect based on how we administer it. So the route that we use to get it. So we're going to talk about that in a second. And then the other piece that impacts how much of an impact the drug is going to have is based on how lipid soluble it is, which basically means how fatty it is. The fattier it is, the more it's going to break what we call the blood-brain barrier. And if it gets through the blood-brain barrier, then it gets into your brain. And when it gets into your brain, that's when we feel the effects of it. So those are kind of the two main things that help us understand when you take a drug, how quickly and how intensely it's going to have an impact on you. And then after that, it moves from your brain and it eventually is eliminated from your body. So these are kind of our main routes of administration. We do have transdermal is one now that don't come on here. But basically, how long it's going to take the drug to take effect depends on how you take it. The reason it takes the longest when you orally ingest something is because it has to go through your gastrointestinal system too, which it does not have to do with your other routes of administration. And so that adds a bunch of time because it has to be broken down from your stomach and go through your GI tract. When you inhale, the reason why it is the quickest route of administration is because the route to get to your brain always goes through the lungs, to the heart, to your brain. So when you inhale, it goes straight to your lungs. So if it's going straight to your lungs, it's kind of circumventing anything else that you have to do. When you use intravenously, wherever the site is, it has to travel from there through the bloodstream to the lungs, to the heart, to the brain. So if we inhale, we take it straight to the lungs. Question. All right, and then pharmacodynamics is what do the drugs actually do for our body? So a majority of the impact that we see with drugs abuse exists in the limbic system. So the limbic system is the part of our brain that's kind of the pleasure part of our brain. That's where it houses most of our dopamine. Dopamine is the main chemical that's involved in most drug use. And does anyone know what dopamine does? Yeah, it makes you feel good. So this is our pleasure chemical. And so most drugs have an impact on dopamine, which means it impacts the amount of dopamine we have. It makes us feel good, so we want more. And most of that is happening in our system. So there are three things that are true of drugs that a lot of people don't actually know. And the first is that drugs don't actually do anything to your brain or your body. All they are doing is they are impacting the rate at which natural things happen. So things that are already happening in your brain, drugs can make them happen when they're not happening. They can make them happen at a certain time. They can make them happen more or less frequently. And so what I mean by that is with dopamine, for example, your brain releases dopamine when something happens, when you feel good. So when you're running, for example, you get what they call like the runner's high. Is because of a release of dopamine. Your brain knows to do that on its own. Certain drugs also release dopamine, and so they give you that same high. The problem is, this is going to relate to the last one, which is called the opponent process. This is the rebound effect. So your brain wants to be in what we call homeostasis. So it's always kind of looking for this middle ground. And when we are running and we get that high, it releases the dopamine. So what the brain then does is it releases the opposite chemical, our inhibitory chemical. And the reason it does that is because it's going to then even out. So my high chemical, my dopamine, is going to, and plus my GABA, which is my inhibitory neurotransmitter, those two things together are going to bring me back to normal. So I've got my thing that makes me feel really good. I've got the thing that makes me kind of sedated and sleepy. So now I'm kind of normal. I'm not too sleepy. I'm not feeling too good. So the brain is always looking to kind of do that opposite thing. So what ends up happening is when you introduce drugs into the system to do those things. So for example, amphetamines, the way that they work is by releasing excess dopamine to your brain. So if you take cocaine and you release dopamine to your brain, the brain is going to start doing the opposite. It's going to start sending out the GABA to try to bring you back to the middle. Over time, your brain no longer will send the dopamine out on its own because it's waiting for the dopamine to do it. So the brain starts to learn that I don't need to do this on my own. This other thing is going to be introduced and it's going to do it for me. The brain also learns cues in the environment. So there's, this is really strong with alcohol, especially if you drive past a liquor store, for example, your brain is automatically going to start doing the opposite of what the alcohol does for you because it thinks the alcohol is coming. And so if it thinks the alcohol is coming and alcohol sends out GABA, which is your sleeping neurochemical, it's going to send out your serotonin, your dopamine to try to make you feel more up. So that's why you might start shaking, you might start feeling anxious, you might start feeling hyper, have trouble sleeping, because the brain is sending out the opposite chemical that the drug is going to give you, thinking you're about to get the drug. That's where withdrawal comes into play as well. So this is why it's really dangerous to use before the age of 25, because if your brain doesn't know any better, the brain never learns to send out the dopamine on its own. It's waiting for the cocaine to do it. Or it never learns to send out the GABA on its own. It's waiting for the alcohol to do it. So then over time, people say, well, I can't sleep. You can't sleep because your brain doesn't know to send out GABA because it never learned to do it. The alcohol will do it for you. So it becomes a lot harder because it's, if you start using after 25, the brain is essentially relearning something it once knew. Whereas if you start using before 25, it never learned it to begin with. So it's having to learn it from the get, and that's a lot harder to do. That's especially true to the high risk when you're using during pregnancy. So when a fetus's brain is learning off the bat to not have to send out dopamine, for example, because someone's using cocaine while they're pregnant. So it's automatically in that child when they're born with the inability to regulate their own levels of dopamine. Questions about all of that?
So a young person's brain can develop if they maintain sobriety for a certain period of time. They didn't treat themselves.
No, it can absolutely. So the brain is very plastic. So it can learn it, but it's just gonna take longer. So then the third rule is that all drugs have side effects. So essentially what happens is we have every drug, regardless of whether it's addictive or not, has an intended effect, and then it has side effects. The intended effects usually happen in the brain and spinal cord, so in our central nervous system. The side effects typically happen in what we call the peripheral nervous system, which is the organs. So if you take something and its side effect is nausea, that's because part of the drug that is intended to do something that's interacting with your brain Whereas whatever's left over, whatever doesn't get through the blood-brain barrier, it has to find somewhere to go. So it maybe find somewhere to go in your stomach and into your. Questions about it? All right, so essentially, I can talk about this homeostasis. Essentially, what we have is we have lots of different chemicals in our brain. There's two kind of main types, excitatory and inhibitory. Any chemical that's excitatory is going to make you feel more up, more hyper, more alert. Any chemical that's inhibitory is going to make you feel more relaxed, more calm, sleepier. And so when we talk about the drug classes, depressants, for example, they're acting on your inhibitory neurotransmitters. That's why they're called depressants. They're slowing you down because they are sending out what we call GABA, which is our main inhibitory neurotransmitter. Amphetamines or stimulants, they're stimulating you, they're making you feel more alert, so they're acting on your excitatory neurotransmitters, the chemicals in your brain that make you feel more alert and excited. So essentially what happens, and this is why we have different effects with different drugs, is, and I had a prop and I left it on the kitchen counter, so. We all have ever seen those baby toys that are on shape sorters, so they have different shapes on the top. And only the shape, the little block that's that shape will fit through that. This is essentially the same thing with our molecules and our receptors. So the way that these chemicals are sending messages through our body to tell us to feel more alert or to help us go to sleep. So for example, let's talk about going to sleep in GABA. At the end of every night, at a certain time every night, your body and your brain know to start sending out GABA. That's what's going to make you start to feel sleepy. That's a natural process that happens. The GABA is going to go from, it goes from one neuron to the other neuron, and there's a space in between. And when there is some of the chemical in the space in between, that means it's available for use. So what happens is if there's GABA in between two neurons, then that means that it's available to bind to what we call a receptor. And the minute it binds to the receptor, that's when we start to feel sleepy. But the receptor is a certain shape and only the GABA can fit into that. So it's like that shape sorter. So if it's the star shape, for example, is your GABA, only the star is going to go in there. Only the GABA is going to go in there. The dopamine will go in there. So your brain kind of knows based on what's available in that space in between the neurons, whether you need more or not. So if we talk about antidepressant drugs like Prozac, for example, they're called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So those are essentially the belief being that people who struggle with depression don't produce enough serotonin in their brain. They don't have enough serotonin available in that space between the neurons to utilize. And so what those drugs do is it tricks the brain into kind of blocking so there's the sending neuron and the receiving neuron, and the receptors on both ends, and it blocks those so that the serotonin stays in that middle space, which means it's available for your brain to have, which helps your depression improve because serotonin makes you feel better. So that's one of the ways that drugs work, is by kind of blocking, taking the excess. So if there's excess serotonin, it either needs to go to the receiving neuron and bind, or it needs to be taken back by the sending neuron for later use when you need it. So selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors work by blocking the ability to take it back from the sending neuron. The receiving neurons is how we block, so one way that drugs work is by blocking the receiving neuron as well. That's typically how things like amphetamines work. They work by blocking the receptor. Question.
Do we know? So we've been talking about mental health nonstop for the last few weeks, and I mean, some of the school people know, I mean, it's brutal. But do we know what those psychotropic drugs do over time? I mean, I know that most of the time people say that doctors say, you know, it's for a short window of time, but people then wind up being on them 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Do we know what that does to the brain with prolonged use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with things like Prozac or SSRIs, there's not really any danger of addiction. So those can be used long-term without really any effect. They're called antidepressants, but actually what research shows is they're really not that effective for depression. They are, however, effective for anxiety. So, it's like 8% over the placebo that they're full of depression, which is really bad. But for anxiety, they're actually full, for like chronic low level anxiety. So benzos are also prescribed for anxiety. Those are what we call the anti-anxieties, and they're very useful. And so they are not FDA approved to be used more than 4 weeks for any panic attacks, nothing. But you're right, most people, a lot of people that I know who have been prescribed from those, it's just, they keep getting it wrong.
Especially teenagers. I mean, their brains are forming, you know, and they're being put on these and, I mean, and even beyond addiction, which is bad enough. I mean, but what does a prolonged use do? Does it do anything to your brain that might cause early onset, you know, stuff with dementia or, I mean, do they
Well, I don't know
know?
about dementia, but I do know, so what happens with, like, if you're prescribed a benzodiazepine for anxiety, it's typically for like shorter term, more intense anxiety. So if you're having panic attacks, for example, and the reason for that is because they act really fast, but the half-life is small, so you come off them really fast too. But the thing is, the more intense the effect of the drug, the more intense the long-term negative effects are. So if you are using them long-term, it actually creates more anxiety than what you have in the start. So if this is baseline. So if this is your baseline, like kind of normal, and you're kind of operating at an anxiety level here, they're gonna give you a benzodiazepine, which is going to send out GABA to calm you down. The purpose is to bring you down to here. But what it actually does over long term, because then your brain stops sending out the excitatory at all, it's waiting for the drug to do it. So your brain is almost constantly sending out the inhibitory. So it actually brings you down here. So it's bringing you lower, which means that if you stop using, then your anxiety is gonna go up to all the way up here. Because now you don't have the ability to regulate this without the drug. So if the drug's not there, your anxiety has to be, it's kind of equal to in distance to how low is that. So
And doctors know this.
they do know that. I could get on a soapbox about big pharma, but they get a lot of money, unfortunately, for prescribing them. I think where we miss is not educating people when prescribing them. Here's the danger if you use this long term, especially with something like benzos, most of the time they're prescribed as needed, which gives the person who's getting a prescription a lot of leeway and when they think they need it, when they think they're anxious enough for it. So having this kind of information might make them a little bit more cautious for any side use that they don't. I don't have a problem with them, you know, if you have super intense anxiety about being on a plane and you have to take plane ride, take a little worry. But eventually we can really easily psychologically talk ourselves into finding something that's justified because it's some positive in that in long term. And now we're suddenly more anxious than we ever were because of that healing process. The opposite is happening in our brain. And we don't know, our brain doesn't know how to slow it down without drugs. And that's where the biological age.
Are y'all seeing at school a ton of kids that are on psychotropic now, or you don't know?
Not always. Unless they just tell us.
What are the brand names of the benzos? Where's some brand?
Xanax, and Librium, Ativan.
What's gabapentin?
That is an antidepressant. It's a neuropathy. Yes, it's not a calming. Well, so they do use it. They use it that way. They use it that way typically, like they use it for withdrawal symptoms from alcohol to help with those symptoms. Because anticonvulsants do slow your brain down, because your brain, the thought is with seizure activity, your brain is kind of working in overdrive and it's manifesting physical overactivity versus mental overactivity, which is anxiety. So they do sometimes use those for anxiety and they're not addictive.
Oh,
So they're safer.
my husband's a vet and I've noticed in the last couple of years, pets are getting everybody says their pets are anxious too. I mean, it's weird. It's like people got anxious and. I mean,
They are the personality of their owners a lot.
the level of prescribing of anti-anxiety medications for pets that
Maybe they're taking their pets out.
well, you have to be careful about that, but people's pets are super anxious, and I don't remember complaining about that 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's really.
Yeah, so, well, I just see a lot of the high potency THC in the schools, and my question, I think, has to do with what you just drew. But like, how much would, like, say someone's initial problem was like anxiety or depression, something is mental health related, and then they, you know, use marijuana or something like that, how much would that inhibit sort of this homeostasis that you just described in the brain?
So with THC, it's different because the active component that actually calms you down is the CBD, not the THC. The THC is the part that actually brings you up. So if you've ever used marijuana and sometimes you feel really chill and other times you feel like partying, it's related to how much THC versus CBD is in there. So if they're using marijuana to help calm anxiety, they're really, CBD would be more helpful. But CBD is not addictive, so it's not gonna increase their anxiety if they don't use it. The THC is probably increasing the anxiety because it actually does tap into, it tends to make you more paranoid, more anxious, the THC. But so if they're using high THC content, it's actually gonna make your anxiety worse.
So would it?
But it's hard to know.
Yeah,
Because it's not legal here, so.
Yeah, I was just more so wondering, like, with the mental health aspect of things, like how much that would, like, someone used it would inhibit treating the initial presenting problem.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because it's hard to tease it out at that point. If you've got somebody who's coming in and saying, I'm anxious and I use marijuana daily, it's hard to know, are you anxious because you're using marijuana daily or what's the anxiety there first? And it's hard to treat anybody when they're in active use because how do you get into what really is? And I personally believe, like, this biological stuff matters. This is how we typically start using for psychological reasons, but we keep using for biological reasons because we're trying to prevent the withdrawals. And we're trying to prevent this kind of stuff from happening. But we start, this wouldn't be happening if there wasn't some kind of psychological reason to pick up in the first place. And it's hard to get to that while they're still using.
So would you, like, I guess it would be hard to put a number, but like, sort of like how long would you say would it take to get like a baseline to be able to treat the presenting?
It would probably depend on how long and how much they've been using. So if you've got somebody who just started using like a month ago, I don't think it wouldn't take very long. I think you get their pretty. But if you've got somebody who's 18 and they've been using since they were 12 every day, it's probably gonna take a little bit longer because they don't know any different. And they are using to try to numb or avoid those emotions. So taking away the thing that's allowing them to do that and then saying, now you have to not only feel that, but also let's talk about it is a really hard thing.
Real quick about the gabapentin. First time I went to treatment, I was probably 14. And they put me on gabapentin for whatever reason, that and Neurontin later on. But I couldn't get off the gabapentin for years. The only time I could is by switching to Neurontin, which is, I think, basically the same thing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I don't know where it's not addictive comes in. 'Cause I know for me, I know a ton of people that fight to get off that stuff. It's
Yeah,
dangerous.
It feels real addictive.
It's, I was up like 3,000 milligrams a day. I could not stop. And it wasn't like, there's no high from it. There's none of that kind of stuff. I just could not. And I know
So
countless of people.
this is where the difference, I personally believe there's a difference between psychological addiction and physiological addiction. And so from a physiological medical standpoint, they would say that's one of the requirements to consider something addictive is that it gives you that high. So they would say physiologically it's not addiction. But that's coming from medical professionals who are not really as versed in psychological. So I'm teaching this stuff, but I'm an expert. So like, I'm an expert in this. I'm an expert in psychological. So I think that, yes, there is a psychological addiction.
But people used to say that about marijuana too.
And I agree with
And that
that.
marijuana is not really addictive, but people I went to high school that smoked it every day are still smoking it every day. And they're in their sixties. I pretty much think that somebody ain't got that right.
So even if it's not biologically addictive, it would still be like, I still feel like I need it.
Well, but you have physical, I've known people that tried to give it up and they have physical withdrawals from it, like, God bless, nobody wants to be near them. But they literally are shaking and they're sweating and so there's physical.
So, once again, this is just my opinion. But I personally believe that that's part of the reason why it's being utilized in some places, because people don't want to admit that they were wrong about that. But being able to control it so that it doesn't lead to that does help with that. So rather than saying, actually, we've been wrong this whole time, so let's legalize it. But legalizing it is kind of a way to try to help manage how much THC versus CBD is available safer. Because once again, the marijuana of 50 years ago is not the marijuana of today. I mean, we're looking at like 3% THC versus like 25%.
And the cartridges could be 80%.
Yeah, for the adults now, yes. So to the psychological piece too, I would say, and you're talking about teenagers. So when I was a teenager, I was prescribed Percocet for a migraine. I was like 13. And I took one and I never took it again because it made me feel very out of control. I was like hallucinating. I slept for an entire day and woke up and was like, what do you mean Thursday's on? And that freaked me out. I'm a control freak. I like to be in control. I don't like that time. That's how it felt for me. Now my brother struggles with addiction, my younger brother. Drugs make me feel more in control. And that's the psychological piece of it, I think. It has the same effect on me biologically that it had on him biologically, because eventually he found that old prescription and used it. But for him psychologically, that feeling helped him feel more in control of himself in his life. It made me feel more out of control. And so for me, I was like, I never need this again. But for him, he was like, this is it. This is the answer. So I think that there's the biological stuff is happening, and there's some differences based on genetic, family history, but once again, nobody is more genetically similar to me than he is. And so how is it that we took the same thing and it led to him going down another cold addiction, and it led to me like, no, I'm gonna be an addiction counselor and save the world from this. You know, that's the psychological thing.
Yeah, and your environment was the same.
That, I mean. I don't, yeah. I mean, it was, and also he was really different from me, so I think he was parented differently. Not that it was anybody's fault, but, you know, yeah. Same-ish.
But when you're looking to teach, I mean, I think kids now, instead of scared straight programs, they need to hear more factual data. That they need to hear this at a much younger age. I mean, I've told the story before, carrying my granddaughter who's in 5th grade to see Carrie Underwood in Atlanta. And, you know, it was just like I was giving her marijuana because it was just everywhere. Like we were walking to the parking lot, we're driving down the road, you could smell it. And I started talking about it. My daughter says, Mom, she's only in 5th grade. You shouldn't be talking to her about things like this. And I said, oh yeah, I should. You know, the average age you start is 12 and a half now in Forsyth County schools. And I said, I mean, she's 11. We better start talking about it. And my granddaughter spoke up and said, yeah, to her mom. She said, yeah, Mom, I'm going to hear it somewhere. Isn't it better that I hear it the right way? You know, like what's factual. And so I think it's important. The problem that I see that happens when people are in addiction or when they're in it, and y'all tell me that the people I've met with and talked to is everybody thinks they're in control of their own body when they're in the throes of addiction. I mean, the people I've talked to, you know, or I've heard them say, I know my body. But I mean, and I have said, but you just told me you OD'd 3 times. If you knew your body, wouldn't you not? You should have known that you were up to that line. But I think there must be something about wanting to get as close to that line or just beyond it. And how do you, I think this is great for people that have never, but I don't know if somebody's in the midst of that they're gonna care about this.
Yeah, I mean,
Does that make sense?
I think in the middle of, absolutely, I do think that in treatment, it can be part of it because, you know, it's the same here, saying kids, I think that we kind of act like if we share this information, then it gives them the information to be able to use and do it safely. And there's actually a really good book that outlines this stuff very well called Never Enough. And she struggled with addiction and now she's like a neuroscientist. And she said in that book, oh yeah, I wanted to learn this stuff because then I thought I could use and not have it be a problem. But when she learned it, she was like, never mind. So it's not even in a scary way as much as it's in a, this makes sense and I have to be careful, you know, and I think so like my son, for example, he's adopted and he was exposed to meth in utero. He is severely ADHD now. He's 5 and he's already medicated for that. And he has a family history of abuse, of course, as well. And so these are conversations that I will very readily have with him. And I don't think it's my responsibility to prevent his behavior, but I do think that he needs to understand that when your friends are doing this, and I know you would want to do that too, because he also really likes to fit in. Here's how it might affect you and why, based on your history, things that you have no control over, but unfortunately just is what it is for you.
This is just agreeing with everything that y'all have said, but I have always felt like teenagers, when I worked in middle school and high school, I've always felt like they need to hear over and over again that their brain is not fully developed, because in their mind, they're an adult. And if they hear over and over again that it is affecting a developing brain, maybe it would have an effect on at least one.
Absolutely. Because the part of the brain that develops first is your ability to feel emotions. And the part that develops last is decision making and impulse control. So yes, part of your hearing is developed, but it's the part that's responding emotionally to things versus the part that can think through logically things. So one thing that I want to make sure, and then we can answer questions too, that I just want to say, going back to the shake sorter. One of the things that's really important to know is that alcohol is actually one of the most dangerous drugs that exist, because we know the least about it. And the reason why we know the least about it is because alcohol molecules are actually really small. If you think about like a small marble, that marble is going to fit through all of those shapes. So that means it's actually doing a lot of different things to a lot of different parts of your body, unlike other drugs who do a very specific thing to a very specific part of your body. So we can track that and control that a little bit better. But with alcohol, it's like we're constantly finding new things that it does, because it actually does have some level of like pain relief qualities similar to opiates, because it does bind to opiate receptors, just like narcotics do. So if you've ever been drunk and like stub your toe and you don't feel it until the next day, that's why, because it is binding to your opioid receptors. So it's very dangerous in that way. It's also dangerous in that it has a little bit of a double whammy effect in that alcohol will send out GABA, which is your inhibitory neurotransmitter, but it also will inhibit your ability to produce oh gosh, it's well, it'll come to me. But the excitatory, which is the flip of that, it inhibits that. So it has this double whammy effect. Not only is it sending out more sedation, it's preventing the excitatory. So it's more dangerous than that.
Ask a question real quick. With, when you brought up the part about the family history.
Yeah.
Recently, I've had 2 families that when they have spoken to us and they're seeing their student go through, like they're struggling with some type of addiction. And it's like, well, this is my stepchild, their dad died from an overdose, or I adopted this child and they have a family history of addiction. So when we're in those conversations, and this may be one for the group, what resources are out there that can help with that piece? Because I think some of these families I'm seeing, they're doing everything they can to help this child, but I don't know if it's actually helping. They're, you know, whether it's taking away or searching their stuff and all this stuff that these families are really trying to do everything they can. But it seems like the source comes from that it's part of their family history. Some of it, I don't know if it's just because of their family history or because they know of their family history and they just feel like, because that's what one of the families said was that he just feels like that's his lot in life, that's his path.
Yeah, and I hear that a lot. My brother was the same way. It's like, we have a family history and it was like, was just written in stars. Like, this was just what was gonna happen for me. But it doesn't make sense. It did not, need to not for other. So 2 out of 3 don't struggle with addiction. 1 does, we have the same family history. So, you know, I'm teaching you the biological component of it, but I wholeheartedly believe that there's a biopsychosocial piece to this. So there's a psychological component and a social component. And if your families are saying they're doing everything to try to control the social component and the psychological component, they can't do anything about the biological. But even with the biological, just because you have a family history, it doesn't mean that you are destined. It means that you have a predisposition. So the way that I believe it is based on what we call epigenetics, which means that if you have a family history, you have certain genes that are in your brain and they only become expressed or manifest based on certain contextual things. So I have the gene, my brother has the gene, my other brother has the gene, because we all have the same genes. It became expressed when he had some trauma and medical trauma. He was a lot younger than my brother and I, so there was some social stuff going on with that too. I'm always feeling isolated compared to him and I. He had some medical trauma. So I think that his context led to that gene being expressed. Meaning that then when he introduced that Percocet that he found, he liked it, he needed it. Whereas for me, it never became expressed. It didn't have the, whatever the, like smoking gun or letting God was, I mean, to make it kind of come forward. So that might be true, that it came forward in these people. You cannot control that. So, I mean, for me, the best resource is counseling to kind of help with the psychological and social piece. So there's the social piece that's around like modeling what you see. So I saw my dad drink every single night to cope with work stress. So can we do some stuff around that? Some of the social pieces, whether we're doing social media is a huge part of the social piece nowadays that wasn't around and that wasn't it. And then the psychological piece, which is the trauma, coping, difficult emotions, if you've got guilt, shame. And there's lots of different forms of what have to look like, and lots of great research. Is a great resource, free resource actually. And you're in Northside, right? So it's not too far. It's in the one that it's a free resource. It's the University of North Georgia. Right on Square. And it's free regardless of income, regardless of insurance. And there's no like that much.
Yeah, there is, I see individuals from ages 80 to 80 plus.
And it's not.
Yes.
University of Georgia.
Community. Community counseling.
One of the most interesting things happened to the heard on genetics and addiction. I heard many years ago, but I remember that it was, I was listening to a speaker who was an addiction counselor, and she herself was a recovering alcoholic, and she'd been sober for 25 years. But she said that among her first cousins, there were a lot of alcoholics, and there were none the generation before or before. She made a family tree, not only of who was an alcoholic, but where they grew up. And the generation above were Southern Baptists raised in the South. They never tried alcohol. But then her generation, they tried it and they learned that they had a genetic component. But I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, they're almost like if the generation above had tried it, they might have had problems with it too, but there's the context, their environment.
And I think almost all, if not all, of her generation cousins were alcoholics.
Another question.
So this is a resource that I actually do use with my clients. and they find rather, hasn't anybody know about Mouse Party? It explains this in some kind of like fun terms. You can Google it. It's free online. So for time's sake, I'm not going to necessarily go through it, but basically we have a bunch of mice who are all addicted to a different substance. And what you can do is you can choose the substance, put the mouse in the chair, and it will tell you about this process that we just talked about specific to that substance in like kind of really easy to understand terms. So it would be great for prevention with kids.
Are active throughout the brain. These neurotransmitters act to control neural activity along many brain pathways. When GABA binds to its receptor, the cell is less likely to harm it.
We should be doing this fifth grade.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in another area of the brain, another neurotransmitter called glutamate acts as the brain's special purpose excitatory neurotransmitter.
So you can see like right here, because they're in the space between these two neurons, that means that there's glutamate available. Glutamate's excitatory. So that means if you need to feel more alert or excited, you have this available to you. And when it binds here, that's when you feel it. That's when they connect and you feel the excitement.
When alcohol enters the brain, it delivers a double-sided punch. First, it interacts with GABA receptors to make them even more inflammatory. Second, it binds to glutamate receptors, preventing the glutamate from exciting the cell.
So now we have excess sedation and no excitement. And so we're sort of doubly depressed from a physiological standpoint.
Alcohol particularly affects areas of the brain involved in memory formation, decision-making, and impulse control.
So you got LSD, cocaine, alcohol, meth, marijuana, ecstasy, and heroin. And it'll do the same thing for each mouse.
You send that to me and I'll send it out to everybody.
It's in PowerPoint too.
Oh,
Are you gonna send the PowerPoint?
yeah, I'll send this PowerPoint out to everybody so you have all this information and resources inside of it.
All right. Any other questions?
I guess just to say. And I'm asking and saying for preventative measures, when it says if somebody has predisposition and a parent is wondering how to intervene. The protective factor that we learn the most about is positive community settings. So positive peer relations is like one of the most influential. So Angela, to speak to your question, what kind of is suggested in this world, preventative world, is to get them into a positive peer support system. Like that's the one too that they go, they need to have like a counseling one-on-one, but then also positive peer relationships, whether that's a church group or whether that's, positive support, sports, whatever it is, especially that for predisposition, get them involved in those types of activities. Do you have any data or information on?
I think it's
agreements or not agreements?
It's related to belonging, and I think that's a huge piece of it, and we can belonging. And what tends to happen, so once again, so it's biological is not my main way of thinking about things, so from a sociological way of looking at it, if we see ourselves as different, there's this kind of deviant theory. If I see myself different from the rest of society, then I see myself as a deviant, but then I find community with the other deviants, and we create our own kind of subculture. And it's not about being deviant, it's about finding a community and belonging somewhere. So if there is a high, like for my son, for example, he's high risk, I know he's high risk. And that other kids who are too. Finding that belonging as much as possible so that they don't have, because like I said, this stuff kicks in after you've tried it. It doesn't kick in until you've tried it. So something has to make you want to try it. So how do we kind of try to cope with that by making kids especially feel like they belong, feel like they're part of something, feel safe and attached. There's also a lot of research around the idea of parental monitoring. in that, the more parents know what their kids are doing, the less likely they are to be doing things they shouldn't do. However, there's a deeper piece to that, which is actually related to attachment, because when you go into it further, the research actually shows it's not about whether the parents know, it's about how they found out. So if you found out by going through their phone, they're probably actually more likely to be doing things they shouldn't be doing. But if you found out because they told you, that suggests that they feel safe to talk to you about things, they have a secure attachment with you, they're less likely to be doing things they shouldn't do. So kind of making it so that they know you can talk to me about this, that's a kind of parenting thing. I'm open to hearing these and I talk these things through with you. And I also personally believe that kids are not, it's kind of what you were saying about like, they just say no and stuff. They're not stupid, so we need to tell them the positive place. Like, there's a reason people do this. Let's not pretend like there's not.
So you're saying that it's more important to protect the open line of communication versus monitoring and catching them doing something.
That's it. Yeah, you want them, and there's further research that shows that like mothers are more likely to know directly, whereas dads are more likely to find out from the moms what the kids were doing. So for men specifically, making sure that there's that communication, they feel like they can come to you and talk to you about it. It's a function of feeling like they have a strong relationship with their parents, and that's really what it's about. It's not about whether parents are paying attention. It's about how are they paying attention? Are they paying attention on the sidelines, behind the scenes, checking their emails, checking their Snapchats, checking their, Instagrams, or is it that they're talking to them about their lives?
Or is it at home balance?
Well, if they're already doing things, that would be, but the prevention kind of early on, try to help to not get to a point where you need to do that.
And that's an interesting thought, the education of how to have those conversations and, the importance of that, is a great, development opportunity for them.
Absolutely. It's like, here's why people might choose to use these drugs. Here's the positive things that they do that make people want to do them. Here's the consequences of that though, so that they know both sides of it.
Trying to get the parents to listen, they're the ones we want to hear all this.
Right.
We can't-
Because parents think that if you tell them the positive things, it's just gonna make them want to do it. But once again, we have to give kids a little bit more credit for what they can understand and what they can. It doesn't mean they may not try it, but it might mean that they are more reserved about how far they take it because of the consequence. And it kind of depends, I'm the type of kid where you could tell me only the consequences and I would never do it. I don't want to break the rules. I don't want to get in trouble. My brother, if you tell him not to do it because of the consequences, he's like, we'll see about that. I'm gonna see if that's true for me. So you have to kind of know the kid too, and you have to know what they're going to respond to and what they're not.
When I was principal for the day, I was with Gabby, not that she's principal, but when I was, and I was with her group of kids that voluntarily go to the drug, to talk about their drug usage. And there was a little girl, and I've told this story before, but if you could be invisible, this little girl struck me as she would want to be invisible. She was as pale and white as she could make her skin look. Her hair was dyed as white as it could be. It looked like she wanted to just go into the wall. And I asked if there was something, and I say this not accusatory of parents or saying parents do things wrong. Sometimes when I tell the story, parents think I'm attacking them, and I'm not at all. But I said, if you in this group could go and tell your parents something now about how they were raising you before you ever did drugs, what would you whisper to them, or what would you say? And she spoke up, which out of everybody in that group, I didn't think she would be the one to speak up. And she said, I wish they had given me parameters. I wish that they hadn't made it be so available. And, she said it was always just out on the counter for me to use. It was always given to me. There was never guidelines of saying, don't cross that line. Yeah. And I think most kids do want parameters. I really do. I think they might want to push it, but they like to think, if for nothing else, they like to think that somebody cares about them that much.
That's exactly what there's actually research that backs that exact thing up, that kids who were using say, I wanted my parent to intervene because that would have made me feel like they cared. It would have made me feel like they believed I could be better than that or do more than that. And turning the other way or pretending like it wasn't happening, I feel like they just didn't care.
I think that's even to parents that do give the guidelines and do try and, give the parameters and whatnot. I think that's still encouraging because if they get to the path of recovery, they're gonna appreciate how much you fought for them and tried.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my brother now, he's younger than I am, and he said, he's like, when I was a kid, you were the only person I was afraid of, because I was the only person who was willing to be like, are we gonna talk about the fact that he's upstairs getting high right now and we're open prison programs? Because let's get on him, like, let's stop this. And everybody else was like, oh no, he's just like, or like, oh no, he went to rehab so many times and then he'd come home and it was like, if you use again, you're not allowed to stay here anymore. And my parents were like, oh no, he's not using that. I was like, yes, he is. And he has told me, like, I had so much respect for that because you actually just acted like, this is not okay. Let's help. Let's do something different. Whereas everybody else just wanted to pretend like it wasn't happening because it was easier for them. They didn't know what to do. And I'm not, my parents are wonderful people. They didn't know what to do. But I think that's where I wish they would hear these things because then maybe they would know what to do versus they get themselves to a place where I don't think that's ever going to be a problem. I had 2 kids who never got in trouble once. And then I have a kid who's in trouble every 5 minutes. I don't know how to handle that. But they needed to have those conversations before when they had the kids who weren't getting into trouble because you just never know.
We are at the end. Is there anybody who has they have to say or question they want to ask?
I'm curious, when you're talking about, kids making connections, there are people here from the North side, right? Is Whisper active in North side also?
They do.
Okay, I'm just curious about
They
that.
started just last year, I believe.
I know people started that, and I know that idea is to try to foster these connections because of social media is interfering with kids having connections.
And if we can get the parents interested, I've got some wonderful people who can have these conversations that they might listen to more than me because I'm old and they're not. And yeah,
All right, everybody, then if that is everything, thank you all for coming. Meeting adjourned.
Rachel.
Thank you.
We have to walk right into the meeting.
Yeah. Because I thought it did it all.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what you think about it, right?
No, that's so many conversations.
That was good.